All this morning. Like Kate said, my name is Jordan. I'm one of the pastors here at Thrive, and like I said, it's always fun to be up here to be able to share things God's put on my heart with all of you. Just a quick question. I know for me, I was very excited that it wasn't overcast this morning. Did anyone love the rain a couple days ago? Who's like team, I love the rain? Who's team, I moved to LA because there's no rain and it's sunny all the time? I was like, I don't think I could live in Seattle or anywhere that rains a lot because I was like kind of mopey all day and I was like, this is not good. Like seasonal depression I think would actually be a thing for me, but I'm glad it's sunny, glad it's a little bit warmer, and glad to be here with all of you this morning. I was thinking as I was kind of preparing for this week and thinking about, as we've been talking about milk and honey and what does this mean of this idea is as we're going into the new year, how do we prepare and how do we follow the things that God has called us to in the places where God is taking us? And not that weather has anything with that, but I was like, man, God has brought me to LA where it is sunny and it is beautiful. And what does it mean to live in LA and to be in this place where God is at work here and God is moving here? And what does it look like for us to be a part of that? On Friday night, one of our friends here from church, they attend and they invited us over for just kind of a hangout time with some friends, and they brought a bunch of their coworkers, and it was just a chance where we got to hang out and tell stories and do life together. And it was really cool because the only people I knew were these two people from church, and the rest were just brand new people, and we were kind of just sharing different stories about where we were from and what we were doing. One guy was a magician, and he was traveling on the road and showing kind of his magic act to us. Another guy, he was like an executive producer and does a lot of just creating for some of the major theme parks in the area, and he was talking all about the new Star Wars land and all that, getting the inside scoop. But it was so fun just to hear stories of people and to hear these people's stories. And it got me realizing that all of us have a story. All of us have different things that we're excited about and passionate about, different things that make us do what we do. And I think as we begin to hear these things about people, we begin to understand, what is this person devoted to? What is it in this person's life that makes them tick and makes them work and makes them do the things that they do and pursue the things that they pursue? And I want to think about that. I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about what are the things that people would say about me based off of the things that they hear about me. I want to start by telling a story about a man. His name's Lynn Thurkelson. There's a picture up here of Lynn, and this was him as he was getting ready to join the Air Force. And I want to tell you a little bit about this man because I think we all have stories to tell, and I think it's important to listen and to hear stories. And this was a man who was enlisted and joined the Air Force back at the very tail end of World War II, and he got his wings and his flight license, and he became a pilot that flew in the Air Force, and he served in the Air Force for over 20 years. He's a man who had a lot of combat in the Korean War, and he actually earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, the highest medal you can get in the Air Force, for his time and for his service. And he was a man who was not only devoted to his country and to serving and to selflessly giving, but also to his family. He was married at a young age, and shortly thereafter ended up having 4 kids, and was a dad and a father to these 4 children, and helped raise them in a military household where he was often moving and traveling across the country to new places. And yet he made time for his family, and he made time to care for them and love them. He was a man who, when he eventually retired from the Air Force after 20 years of service, he decided that that wasn't enough, and he went on to help run this camp and manage a camp just over in San Bernardino, actually, and help kind of run this camp that invested in people's lives on a daily basis, and he was devoted to that. He was a man who, after that, he decided he wanted to start his own business, and he opened up this bookstore, and he managed this bookstore where people would come in every day, and he'd have conversations with them, and he would talk with them, and he'd share his life with them, and it was a space of community and warmth and welcome. And he was a man who served in his church and gave much of his time to church. He served as an elder and met with people and led people and took time for people. I think all of us have a story, and all of us have things that people would say about us. Each of us have different things that we give and devote our life to, and I want you to think about your life and the story that would be told of you, and I want you to ask yourself, who are you and what are you devoted to? If you guys have your Bibles, I'd love for you to turn with me to Deuteronomy. That's where we've been the last week, and as we're starting this series, Deuteronomy chapter 6. And as Andrew was kind of filling us in last week, we were talking about this idea that what does it look like to to be led to the land of milk and honey, right? And kind of a little bit of context here, that sounds really weird and really random. What does that mean, right? And as Andrew was talking about last week, that this was this phrase that was given to the people of Israel, God's chosen people. And God said that he was going to promise and give them a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of abundance, a land that wouldn't be need, a land where they could thrive and prosper and give their life to something. It was a place of purpose. It was a place of calling. It was a place that God said he was going to take the people to. And as Andrew kind of recapped last week, right, the people of Israel, God's chosen people, that God leads them out of slavery to the oppressive Egyptians, and they're wandering through the desert, and they're getting ready to cross over into this land that God has promised them, and God gives them an instruction before they enter the land. And basically a summary of all that we talked about last week is God said, if you want to prosper this land that I'm giving you, devote your entire life to me. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Love the Lord your God with everything that you have. And Andrew talked about last week that we can trust God with everything that we have. And this morning I want to talk about what does it look like now that we begin to unpack and begin to realize that we can trust God fully and completely. What does it look like now to prosper in this land that God has given us? What does it look like to prosper in the places God has called us to? What does it look like to be devoted to the life God has placed before us? And so we're going to backtrack a little bit and start in verse 5, Deuteronomy chapter 6. You guys have a Bible. We actually have Bibles under all your seats this morning, which is kind of fun. You can grab that and turn if you want. If you just want to listen, that's cool too. If you want to pull it up on your phone, that's okay. It's not going to be up on the screen, but that's okay. We can still track with it. And so Moses, the guy who is leading the people, the nation of Israel, is saying the words of God to the people. And he says to the people who are sitting there listening, waiting, about to enter the land that God has promised them. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit down in your house and when you walk on the road, and when you lie down and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes and your forehead, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. All right, so we just got done talking about, Moses said to people, love God with everything you have. And then just in case the people missed it, he begins to go through this list of what does it actually look like to love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your mind and with all of your soul. And there's this list of things, and I just kind of want to spend a little time walking through what does it actually look like to be fully devoted to following God and loving him with everything that we have. The first thing that it says here in Deuteronomy is, it says, place these things, keep these things in your heart. Now back in kind of ancient Near East culture, Jewish culture back then, the heart was actually kind of this term that we would refer to as the mind. For them, it was their thinking center. It was the part of the body that was close to them, and it was the intersection between their will and their thoughts. And that's kind of how they viewed the heart. And so here when Moses is saying, keep these things in your heart, this command to love God with all that you have, it's this personal thing. It's this deep internal sense of, if you truly want to be devoted to God and love God with everything, it first has to take root inside of you personally. It has to overcome your thoughts. And those thoughts which then influence your feelings, and it has to be this place where the things you think about intersect with your will, the things that you do, and the people would have understood that the heart was this center inside the human body that was the center point of all of this. And so before we go anywhere, I want us to think about what does it look like to love God at the center, at the core of who we are. That before that can spread and branch out anywhere, it starts with this understanding of who God is personally in your life. And Moses, keep these things close to you in your heart internally. And it doesn't stop there. The next thing he says right after that, in verse 7, he says, you shall teach these things to your children. It begins to spread from the sphere of internal self to the next level kind of out, right, as family. Now, I don't have kids, and I don't have a lot of experience with kids. I'm an uncle, and that, I guess, speaks for something. I get to do the fun things with them and then send them home to their parents, and actually they have the hard job, right? And some of you guys know that as the little ones are swirling around. And he says, pass these things on to your children. Pass them on not only to the thing that's most precious, the thing that's entrusted you to love and to care for and to watch over and to guard and to guide, but if you think about it, your children, your family, are the people who see you every moment of every day. They're the people who see the ins and outs of your life and how you live. And right, you can teach them something, but the way they're truly going to learn it is by you living it out. You can tell them what to do, but unless you're living it, right, they're not going to follow what you're saying. And it's this idea that more is caught than taught. And when Moses here is saying is don't only internalize it in your heart, but teach it to your children, I think it's this reminder that every single way that we live and interact and associate with the world and with our family and with our kids is being observed and is being watched. And what does it look like to demonstrate our love for God in the way that we live with the people who know us best? Well, you guys can see me here on a Sunday morning and I act one way, and hopefully my life isn't much different, but ask my wife here, right? Things are different sometimes, and she knows this better than anyone. I get really hangry, and if I don't get enough food in me, it's just like game over. And I'm so sorry. And it's one of those things, I like to blame it on the fact that I'm hypoglycemic, and it's just a nice way of saying that I need to get food in me, and my blood sugar drops really quickly, but really it's just I get impatient, and I get hungry, and I turn to a completely different person, and what would it look like for me to represent Jesus, not only here on a Sunday or when I'm at work or if I'm with friends, but at home with the people who know me best and see the ins and the outs of my life? And I think for this to begin to take root, we're getting a glimpse that this is an all-inclusive devotion and love for God. It isn't just the things that we say, it's the way that we act and the way that we live and the way that we teach the people who are closest to us, our family. And so Moses says, let these things take root in your heart, but beyond just internalizing it, let it pass on to the people who are closest to you, the people who see you every day, to their family, and teach these things to your children. And he continues on, he says, and you shall talk about these things when you sit in your house and when you walk on the road. Okay, we're beginning to see another sphere here. It starts internally, but then it's branched out to the people who are close to us, to our families. But then it's this instruction to talk about it with people all the time. Moses says here to talk about it in your home, right? This idea, again, of home and safety and comfort in this place of people who know you and you're free to be yourself. And let this just be a daily part of your conversation, the way that you interact and the way that you live. And it doesn't stop there. He says, but not only at home, when you're walking on the road, talk about these things. When you're driving on the 101 or you're stuck in traffic on the 10 and you're late for work and you walk into the office and you sit down and you're like, man, I don't want to see anyone because I'm rushing and I'm late and I have this assignment due and this project deadline. And most things, talk about it in these moments. Let your life represent God in these moments and the fact that you love God so deeply and so passionately that it can't even escape the times when you're out working with your coworkers and with your friends, and just talk about it all the time. There's not a lot I really talk about all the time, and I think probably the two things that if I were to think about what do I talk about most, I'm a newlywed and I'm in the honeymoon phase, and so it's my wife. Right? I talk about her all the time and how amazing she is, and it's something that I think about and I dwell on because I experience and I know this depth of love, and what would it look like for me to talk about God all the time because I had this same experience of being loved and being known. And I think the things that we talk about are the things that we're devoted to. What is it that we talk about all the time? And Moses in here, talk about God and his love for you when you're at home and when you're at work and when you're with friends and when you're with coworkers. What would it look like to talk about God all the time? And so he says, let it be internalized, take it in your heart. And he says, teach it to your family, the people who see you every day and in every moment. He says, but don't let it stop there. Because to truly be devoted to God, this God who's leading you into this new land and this land of purpose and promise, You got to take it with you as you're on the road. And you got to take it with you in this new country. And you got to take it with you beyond your home. And then he says something, and this is even more challenging. He says, talk about it in your house and when you're on the road. He says, and when you lie down and when you rise in the morning. That your last thought of the day is, man, God, thank you for today and the things that you've done. And your first thought of the morning is, Jesus, how can I get to today? And I know for me the first thought is, oh, why is my alarm going off? And I snooze it like 100 times. And then I finally pull up my phone and I kind of like scroll through Instagram because it kind of wakes me up and it's this mindless activity. And finally I stumble out of bed and then I'm late. And so then I'm scrambling to get out of the house and I run off to work. And soon enough it's lunch. I say, man, I haven't even thought about God once today. Can anyone relate to that? Has anyone ever been there, right? And what would it look like to wake up and the first thought be about God? To the last thing of the day, to lay your head on the pillow, and it's usually the same routine for me as I crawl into bed and I'm too tired of anything else, and so I scroll through Instagram again, right? And it's this mindless activity, or I put on Netflix and I fall asleep not even remembering or thinking about this deeper sense of purpose and calling and love that the creator of the universe says, Jordan, I want to be a part of your life and know you and hear about the things you're doing. And Moses continues in this. He says, not only when you wake up and not only when you go to sleep, but he says, put these things, and he says, bind them to your hands and place them as a reminder on the center of your forehead. And this sounds a little crazy, right? It's like, I'm not going to walk around with this box on my forehead. Well, in Jewish culture, they actually take this seriously enough that they actually do this sometimes, especially Orthodox Jews and practicing Jews, and it's called the tefillin. It's this little box that they literally strap to their forehead. And in it is these 4 different Bible verses. 2 are from Exodus, and reminding the people of what does it mean that God rescued them from the slavery and persecution and suffering in Egypt and brought them to this promised land. And the other 2 verses that they keep literally in this box on their forehead is this reminder, one right here in Deuteronomy chapter 6, that to love God with everything that you have. And later in Deuteronomy chapter 11, it says the same thing, and they keep these 4 written passages with them all times to remind them that God is with them, and God has led them, and God has brought them into a new place, and God has called them to love. And it sounds a little crazy. You're probably not going to walk in Monday morning with a box on your forehead or something strapped to your arm. But think about symbolically what that means. That the truths of God are constantly running through their mind. That God instructs them that the things of our hands, the things that we work with and use when we're typing on a keyboard, when we're fixing a car, when we're on a movie set, when we're playing an instrument, that the things of our hands are devoted to this reminder that God loved us and called us and is leading us into a land of purpose. Hopefully by this point you're beginning to see that devotion to God is an all-inclusive thing. It's a whole life thing. It's not just a once a week, Sunday morning, sit in the chair kind of faith, but an everyday, life-changing journey in pursuit of God. As we get into a new year, it's easy to form new habits, and it's easy to wrestle through and to talk to, man, God, what do I want to do differently this year? What is 2019 going to bring? And what would it look like if we included God on our journeys? What would it look to truly be devoted to loving God with all of our hearts and with all of our souls and with all of our might? Moses here gives a pretty good depiction to the people of Israel. He says, it looks like in everything you do, that God is a part of it. It looks like when you wake up, you're thinking about God. When you go to sleep, you're thinking about God. And when you're driving to work, you're thinking about God. And when you come home and just want to veg out, you're talking about God with your family and with your kids. And I got to be honest, I think about God sometimes, but don't think about it all the time. And what would it look like to fully trust and believe God enough to say, man, God, I want you to be the center of everything that I do. And everywhere that I do it. as I was thinking about this idea, I kept going back to this passage of Scripture in the New Testament, several thousand years after Moses speaks to the people and the people enter the Promised Land. And it's a book written by one of Jesus' disciples, one of his closest followers, and is an instruction to this church that he's leading and investing in. And it's in 1 Peter chapter 2, and Peter says to the people in this moment, to the church, he says, like newborn infants, long for pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow into your salvation, right? And so Peter is talking to this church here. He's talking to this group of believers, and he says, man, you want to know what it's like to follow God? That you need to long for it so deeply, like a newborn infant literally needs milk to survive. And he kind of gives this analogy and this metaphor of milk. It's kind of ironic that we're talking about milk and honey and God leading into this promised land. And this idea of milk, right? Milk is sustenance. Milk is life. Without milk, a baby can't survive. That's how they get their strength, and that's how they grow, and that's how they develop. And you moms, you know that way better than I do, right? You should be coming up here and speaking about it, right? It's this idea that literally it's the source of nutrients that keeps this newborn infant alive. Last weekend after church, my brother and sister-in-law, they were out of town, and they asked me and my wife Lacey to go babysit two of their kids, and it was this fun time. And like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with kids, but I have some. I'm the fun uncle, hopefully. And so one of them is 6 years old, the other is 3, and me and my wife were in charge of just caring after them. We spent the night with them and just made sure that they were good, you know. And I remember one of those things of, it's a lot harder than you think, right? And your parents are laughing at me right now. Yeah, I think about doing it every day, Jordan. Okay, I get it, right? But I remember sitting there watching this movie. We're watching Monsters, Inc. And I'm sitting holding the youngest in my lap. And then I looked at it, and there's just like this blood on his face. Like, oh no, what have I done? He's literally just sitting here. And he got this bloody nose, and I didn't notice. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to go take him to the bathroom and wash his hands. And he sees his face in the mirror, and he freaks out and starts just bawling. And then it's just like, oh no, what happened? And then she starts crying. I was like, what are we going to do? And so I finally figured it out and cleaned him up. And shortly after, we put the other kids to bed, and we wake up finally in the morning. And again, we wake up to just not screams, but deep crying. And the 6-year-old, she woke up with this gushing bloody nose, and it was really bad. And I don't like the sight of blood. I was like, Lace, you gotta take care of this to my wife. And she doesn't like blood either, but she gets some mom and she takes care of it. And finally we get it all cleaned up. And it was one of these things like bloody nose after bloody nose was happening. I was like, what is happening here? And I'm in charge of taking care of these kids, and their parents are gonna think that we're like abusing them or not taking care of them. I'm never fit to be a parent. It was this awful moment. And finally they were fine, and it ended up being great. And it was a good 24 hours with the kids, and they survived. Hopefully told some funny stories about it. But I realized in that moment how dependent kids are on their caretakers. And that's not even an infant, right? And this is a kid who can kind of function on their own a little bit more. And when I read this passage in Peter, and as Peter's saying, like, newborn infants long for milk, I think about my nieces and nephews and their dependence on the people around them. I think about them as they were little kids, they literally couldn't do anything on their own and needed a simple thing like milk to survive and to grow. And Peter's saying, you want to grow in your knowledge of God, you want to grow in your following or pursuit of Jesus, then you need to long for Jesus like a baby longs for milk. That you literally cannot live and exist without the Word of God. That's what Peter is saying here. That's the level of devotion Peter is describing to the people who are reading this. And I can't help but ask the question to myself, am I truly devoted and dependent on God in this way? Because judging by the way that I live, I wouldn't say that, because I go several days sometimes without reading my Bible or without talking to God or barely acknowledging Him. And what would it look like to have a level of devotion that we really genuinely realize that our life and our spiritual life and our growth was dependent on the things of God? The sheer knowledge that is in the book of this scripture, right? The this love letter from God to his people saying, read this and know about me so I can lead you and I can show you how deeply I love you and how much I care for you, that this is your life source and your sustenance. Would we take this in like milk and realize that we're so dependent on the things of God that it informs and it influences and it shapes our life in a new way? And I got to say, man, what would life look like if we believed that and we trusted in that and we followed God in that level of dependence and devotion? It's the same devotion that Moses is talking to the people. Says, if you want to prosper in this new land, commit to loving God with everything that you have. We were talking about a little bit last week of what would it look like as a community to do this together. What would it look like as Thrive and this family here to push and challenge each other to be devoted to the things of God? We put up this slide last week, and we got it here again of just kind of this reading plan that we almost want to go through at Thrive of just these different ways that we can dig into Scripture and different ways that we can be reading together and ask ourselves, what are we learning and what are we doing? And we kind of put this up last week and said, man, what would it look like as Thrive to do this throughout the week? Right? If you checked your email and didn't just skim through it. I know I kind of skimmed through. I was like, what am I doing? I want to do this. And Katie sent it out, and it was this reminder of, hey, did we do this week? And what are the things that we learned? And we said, what would it like to read Scripture together? And this week, this is the one for this week of, let's read Deuteronomy together. Let's read the next passage and spend some time just in Scripture saying, God, what do you have for me in this? And spend time in prayer and just literally conversation to God saying, God, what do you want us to do? And how do you want this to take shape and root in my life and inform the ways that I live? But don't just leave it there. Actually talk about it with someone. Text a friend and say, hey, what did you get out of Deuteronomy this week? And maybe that's a little weird, but hey, what could happen if we just tried it? If we committed to just one day this week saying, man, God showed me this really cool thing, and I saw what is it like to be devoted to God in this way, and we share it with each other. Like it was the life milk that we needed to survive and to live and to mature in our faith. What if we treated it this way? And then we lived it out. Not just at home, but in the workplace, with coworkers and with friends. And I want to challenge us. I want to challenge myself to it this week of, let's do this together. And the passage concludes this section, and after Moses says to be fully devoted to these things and fully committed to loving God with all that we have all the time, he says it in verse 10 of Deuteronomy chapter 6. He says that when the Lord your God brings you into this land flowing with milk and honey that he swore to your father Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, this land that has great cities that you did not build, and houses full of good things that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take care unless you forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve. By his name you shall follow and love. And Moses says, this is what it looks like to be fully devoted to God in every way that you live. And he says, but in a little bit you're going to enter this land of promise. This land of milk and honey, this land of sustenance, this land of growth, this land of sweets, this land of fulfillment. He says, don't forget me when you get there. Don't forget about me when life is good. And just take me with you. Be just as devoted to me in the good times as you were in the hard times. Be just as devoted to me when you feel like you have everything you need and anything you want, and there's no need for God anymore. Need for God. And he says, don't forget me. It's easy at the beginning of a year to say, man, God, I want to set up these patterns and I want to go through this reading plan. I want to talk about it with other people and I want to join a small group this year and I want to be a part of Thrive. I want to be consistent and I want to love my coworkers and my family better. And it's easy to say these things. It's easy to think about, at least for me, Jesus in the morning and Jesus at night when it's January 1st, 2019, and when I'm quick to forget. And Moses says, don't forget when you enter this new land. Don't forget me when life just keeps rolling and ticking and moving forward, and it's easy to forget. And what would it look like for us as a community to be a people that puts routines in our life that remind us to be disciplined even when it's easy to forget? And I could go through a list of things to do, and I could go through a list of disciplines that are helpful, and I want you to wrestle through it. I want you to say, man, if I really want to take this seriously and I truly want to love God with all that I am, what is it for you that God is saying, I want you to do this, and I want you to commit to this, and I want you to be devoted to me in this way? In an all-inclusive way that shapes and forms everything that we do and everything that we talk about, and in a way that truly helps us grow as we're longing for the things of God. You can put up the picture again of Lynn Thurkelson, and I told you about Lynn at the beginning of this time, and I said we all have a story, we all have things that we're devoted to, and the things that we do and the stories of our life are a depiction of the things that we are truly devoted to. And I don't know this man as Lynn Thurkelson. I know him as Granddaddy. You could probably tell because we look pretty similar. Right? And this was him as he joined the Air Force in times of World War II. And I told you things I've heard about my granddaddy. I told you that he was a loving father and devoted to his country and devoted to service, and he was a self-starter and a leader of people and committed follower of Jesus. But that's not who I know him as. I know him as my grandfather. I know him as the man that when I was a little kid and I'd go over to their house, he would hold my hand and walk with me to the mail. We'd check the mail together, and I would talk the whole way, and he would just listen and smile. I knew him as the man that had his workshop in the basement, and he'd let me sit there and play with his tools and make wood creations with him. And I knew him as the man who would walk with me and give me life advice as we walked along the creek on their property. And he was a quiet man, and yet he had so much wisdom and so much knowledge. And he was a man who never really talked to me or quoted Bible verses to me, and yet I knew without a doubt how deeply he loved Jesus. He was a man who imparted his love for God to me by the ways that he lived his everyday life. He was a man who selflessly gave and served and loved his family. I learned more about Jesus through this man, through my grandfather's life, than I ever did reading the Bible or going to church on Sundays, because he actually lived it. That God meant so much to him that when he woke up, he spent time with God. And God meant so much to him that when he went to bed, he thanked God for his day. And he shared it with his family and with the people around him. And he lived a quiet, simple life, and yet his quiet, simple life was simply devoted to Jesus. Eight years ago, my grandfather passed away, and this is a picture of his gravestone. And Lynn Simpson Thurkelson. And that's all that's left of his life and his memory. And you can see there is his birth date, 1923. His death date in 2011. And there's a space in between the birth date and the death date, and on many gravestones, right, it's that little dash in between the time that someone is born and the time that somebody passes. And We don't get to choose the day that we're born. We don't get to choose the day that we die. All we get is this little dash in between those two numbers, those two dates. And with that dash, we get to choose what we want to do with it. We get to choose how we spend our days and what we do when we wake up, when we do when we go to bed, and we get to choose who we spend our life with, and we get to choose who we invest in, we get to choose our career, and we get to choose what we're devoted to. We don't get to choose anything else. And yet that line in the middle, that space in between is what defines us, is what people remember us for. It's why I remember my granddaddy is granddaddy. It's a man that I look up to and respect and has shaped my life. A few years before he passed, I remember walking one more time along the creek, and it was my first year at college, and I was trying to figure out what I was doing in life, and I remember him in his quiet way that he would, just talking with me and giving me life advice. I remember him talking about the woman that I would marry one day, and he said, Jordan, make sure that she's a woman who loves Jesus with all of her heart and remembers to put Jesus first in everything she does. And he said, because if you do, you'll be okay. And I never got to meet my wife, and yet I know that those words helped inform decisions that I've made. Simply because he was willing to live his life, to live his dash, to live the time that he was given solely for Jesus. That he was devoted to that. What is it that we're devoted to? What is it that we spend our time doing? Because the things that we do and the things that we talk about and the places that we invest in are the things we're devoted to. Do we long for Jesus? Do we have disciplines in our life that help us to not forget? What is it like for you to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might, in every area of your life? God, I thank you for